Although your iPad could contain music, movies, podcasts and apps via wireless connection, when you need to do things like sync the media from your computer's iTunes library, add books to the iBooks application, or import photos from your computer, you must use a wired USB connection to your computer. The application you use to manage the whole thing is Apple's iTunes. Let's take a look at how the iPad is reflected in iTunes. After you have connected the iPad to your computer using a USB cable, by default iTunes should launch when you attach the iPad. If it doesn't, launch it. If you haven't plugged your iPad into your computer for a day or so, iTunes will back it up. In iTunes source list, you should see the iPad listed under the Devices heading. Select it, and the iPad Summary tab fills the window. You can rename your iPad by clicking on the iPad's name in the source list and then entering a new name. The top of the summary pane shows your iPad's name, capacity, software version and serial number. In the middle of the pane is the version area, where you find the check for updates and restore buttons. iTunes checks for iPad software updates every few days, but you can click the check for updates button if you want to check manually. If you'd like to restore your iPad to the condition it was in originally when you first unwrapped it, click the restore button. We'll cover why you should do this when we talk about troubleshooting in another movie. Before we look at the options area, let's move to the bottom of the window, and here you'll find a capacity bar. This tells you how much content is stored on your iPad. Each kind of media, audio, video, photos, apps and books, has a different colour and a different entry below the bar. By default, these entries tell you how much space is occupied by each kind of media. To the right of the bar is a button. If you haven't made any changes to the way you'll sync your iPad, this button will read Sync. You just click on it to sync the iPad. When you sync the iPad, the information and media you've asked iTunes to copy to your iPad is copied. If there's not enough room on the iPad to sync everything you've chosen, iTunes will tell you so. At that point, you'll need to choose fewer items to sync. If you make a change, for example, let's now sync photos, the sync button is replaced by revert and apply buttons. Click on apply and iTunes accepts your changes and the sync button appears again. Then click on sync to actually sync the iPad. For now, let's move on to the options area in the summary tab. Open iTunes when this pad is connected is on by default. It means that when you plug in your iPad, iTunes will launch if it's not currently running. I like this option on. But if you normally charge your iPad by plugging it into your computer and get tired of iTunes launching, then switch this option off. Sync only checked song and videos is useful for selecting just the media you want to sync to your iPad. For example, if there's one track in an album that you absolutely hate, you can enable this option and then uncheck the box next to that track. When iTunes syncs that album to the iPad, it will leave out the unchecked track. The iPad can play both standard definition and high definition videos, though it scales down HD videos so that they don't actually play at a high definition resolution. HD videos use considerably more data than standard definition videos, meaning they chew up quite a bit more storage space. If you want to put more videos on your iPad, you'll enable the Prefer Standard Definition Videos option. That way, when iTunes syncs the movies and TV shows in your iTunes library, it will first sync standard definition videos. If there's room left over after that, it will sync high definition videos. The Convert Higher Bitrate to 128 kilobits per second AAC option is another way to save space on your iPad. The higher bitrate an audio file has, the larger the file. This option will take AAC audio files, which is the audio format used by the iTunes Store, that have a higher rate, 256 kilobits per second for example, and convert them to 128 kilobits per second. Using this option, you can pack more music on your iPad. Note, however, that when this option is on, it takes iTunes much longer to sync your files because it first has to convert them. You can ask iTunes to sync music and videos to your iPad in a variety of ways. If you'd rather do it yourself, by dragging music and videos directly to the iPad in iTunes source list, enable the Manually Manage Music and Videos option. At the bottom is the Configure Universal Access button. This contains settings that help those with disabilities use the iPad, and this will be discussed in a later movie. The Encrypt iPad Backup option. When you restore an iPad with the Restore button, we spoke about that earlier, you're prompted to choose a backup file. If other people have access to your computer, you may not want them to restore their iPads with your backup file. To prevent them from doing this, you could encrypt your iPad backups. Enable this option, click Change Password, and enter and verify a password for your backup. Later, when you want to restore your iPad, you need to enter this password.